Hi, everyone. It's Ashley, and I'm here this week to talk with you about Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. One reason I chose this particular book for my discussion post was that I really liked the novel. When I taught school several years ago in South Carolina, I taught a class on Southern writers, and this was one of the books that we studied in the course. So I thought it would be good to read it again. I hadn't read it in several years and found that I still enjoyed it as much as I did then. So I want to start by kind of giving you a little bit of background about the book. It was originally published in 1937 in September, and then it was republished in 1978. Zora Neale Hurston was actually raised in Eatonville, Florida, and so that's kind of where some of her inspiration came from as far as some of the townspeople and the name of the town. She modeled some of the people in some of the characters in the book after people in the town. Joe Starks, she modeled on Joe Clark, who was the mayor of Eatonville during her childhood. And the hurricane that happens in the book, she patterned after the hurricane in 1928 that hit Lake Okeechobee. That particular one killed almost 2,000 people in the Everglades. And then she also survived a hurricane herself in the Bahamas in 1929. A lot of people, as I was reading some background about this, hailed this as a feminist novel. There were some who didn't like it. Richard Wright, for example, said the sensory sweep of her novel carries no theme, no message, no thought. But on the other hand, Alice Walker said, there is no book more important to me than this one, and Oprah Winfrey calls it her favorite love story of all time. It's regarded as a masterpiece today. Time magazine listed it in 2005 as one of the 100 best English language novels published since 1923. If you haven't seen the movie about the book, that is out as well. It first aired in March of 2005, and it stars Halle Berry as Janie. I happened to catch it the other day, and so I recorded it and watched it yesterday. I don't think I had ever seen it. I don't recall ever watching it, but I really did enjoy it. The main inspiration for Janie and Tea Cake's relationship and the love that they have in this book was actually from a relationship that Hurston had for a gentleman named Percival McGuire Punter, and he was about 20 years younger than she was, but she called him or her relationship with him the real love affair of my life. So I found that very interesting. She did finish the novel in just 7 short weeks, and then she was ready to go. So let's kind of jump into the novel. I've got a lot of things I want to say. I thought there were a lot of different things that needed to be touched on, and I have some questions for you at the end. So this is the version of the book that I have. I've had this since I taught in South Carolina, which was in 2005 and 2006. So I'm not sure what version you have, but the page numbers I'll be referencing will be from this version. So as the book opens, Janie has returned to Eatonville. She's been gone for about a year and a half. We learn in the first few chapters that she's of mixed race heritage, and when she was younger, she didn't realize she was Black until she saw a picture of herself with a lot of other white children. And somebody had to actually point out that that was her. But in the beginning of the story, we see that, again, she's come back to Eatonville. She's talking with her friend Phoebe. And the rest of the book then, except for chapter 20, is Janie recounting the story of what's happened to her over the last year and a half and before that to her friend Phoebe. One thing that you'll notice throughout is that language does play a very crucial role throughout the book. There's an omniscient narrator, but that's interspersed with Janie's voice, along with the dialogue of others. There's a lot of dialect in here. They didn't use a lot of standard written English in that dialect, so it may have been difficult for you to understand some of it. I don't know. There were just parts here and there that I had to reread just to make sure. Lots of colloquial phrases, a couple of them in particular on page 7. Janie says, unless you see the fur, a mink skin ain't no different from a coon hide. That was not a phrase that I had heard before, but something that might have been said in her area. Another one on page 98. Evening, Miss Starks. Could you let me have a pound of knuckle pudding till Saturday? And then that one had the note at the bottom of the page that said it was a beating with the fist. I had a great uncle who used to say, I'm going to give you a knuckle sandwich. So I guess it's kind of the same thing. One thing I did find interesting on page 14, it talks, this is the chapter 2, where we really see a lot about Janie's relationship with Nanny. And it says, she, meaning Nanny, slapped the girl's face violently and forced her head back so that their eyes met in struggle. With her hand uplifted for the second blow, she saw the huge tear that welled up from Janie's heart and stood in each eye. She saw the terrible agony, and the lips tightened down to hold back the cry and desisted. Instead, she brushed back the heavy hair from Janie's face and stood there suffering and loving and weeping internally for both of them. This is a stark contrast from what we saw when we read Black Boy. In Black Boy, we saw that there were a lot of parents who were slapping their children around or beating their children. Richard Wright was the brunt of a lot from different members of his family. But this is different here. Nanny slaps her, but then almost immediately turns and comforts her. So, you know, that's one of the contrasts that I really picked up on. Janie learns pretty early on that you don't have love just because you got married. Her first marriage was to Logan Killix, who she wasn't thrilled about marrying. And she says on page 25, she knew now that marriage did not make love. She had no connection to Logan. She didn't like him physically. He was much older than her. Emotionally, there was no connection. Definitely not one intellectually. So she was kind of thrown into a marriage because it was somebody that could take care of her. And that's, I think her nanny knew maybe that Nanny was going to die soon. And so she wanted to make sure that Janie was going to be taken care of by someone. One of the main themes throughout the novel was that theme of power and control. Not really in Logan Killix, but it is seen a lot in Joe Starks. And several examples that we have of that. He doesn't let Janie speak for herself. Very much. He doesn't like it when she talks back to him. When they first go to Eatonville and Joe becomes mayor, the character Tony says, and now we'll listen. This is on page 43. And now we'll listen to a few words of encouragement from Mrs. Mayor Starks. But Joe immediately turns around and says, thank you for your compliments, but my wife don't know nothing about no speech making. I never married her for nothing like that. She's a woman, and her place is in the home. So he doesn't want Janie to speak. He doesn't ever really accept Janie as she is. He has this vision of kind of what he wants a woman to be, what he wants his wife to be like, what he wants Janie to be like. And so he doesn't ever really let her express herself. He forces her to hide her hair. When one of the other gentlemen of the town is on the front porch of the store playing checkers with some of the other townspeople, and Joe is in the back of the store, and he notices Walter looking at Janie, kind of almost trying to feel her hair without touching it. And so at that point, he realizes that, the hair, he doesn't want it to be seen. And on page 55, the narrator says, "This business of the head rag irked her endlessly," her talking about Janie, "but Jody was set on it. Her hair was not going to show in the store." Jody was jealous of Janie, or he was jealous of, not necessarily her, but he was jealous of the attention that she got from other men. Janie was probably much lighter skinned than Joe Starks was. She was quite beautiful, was the impression that I got from the book. She probably had very long, beautiful, maybe very thick hair. And the narrator also goes on to say on page 55, she was there in the store for him to look at, not those others. So Jody didn't want any attention at all to be on Janie. Another example of the power and the control is on page 75. This is at the last page of chapter 6. Says, Janie did what she had never done before, that is, thrust herself into the conversation. Jody didn't like her talking to the other people in the town. He wanted her always working in the store and didn't want her into the conversation. Sometimes God gets familiar with us women folks too and talks his inside business. He told me how surprised he was about y'all turning out so smart after him making you different, and how surprised y'all is going to be if you ever find out you don't know half as much about us as you think you do. It's so easy to make yourself out God Almighty when you ain't got nothing to strain against but women and chickens. You getting too mouthy, Janie, Starks told her. Go fetch me the checkerboard and the checkers. Sam Watson, use my fish. Okay, this is Janie's attempt to kind of break out from his control, from Jody's control. She wanted to be part of the porch. She wanted to be part of what was going on the porch. He uses language to belittle her. But once he dies, one of Janie's first acts of liberation is to free her hair. She takes her hair out takes her hair out of the wrap that she has it in. So Tea Cake then, when she meets him, allowed her to truly explore who she really was and what she wanted. She became more confident after Jody's death. She falls in love with Tea Cake and her language changes. The town questions her actions with him. But she says on page 115, he done taught me the maiden language all over. She's coming into her own. She's finding her voice, voice that she didn't have with Jody. But she sees Tea Cake as her one true love. And at the end of chapter 13 on page 128, she says he drifted off into sleep, and Janie looked down on him and felt a self-crushing love. So her soul crawled out from its hiding place. This was true love. Another quote she says on page 133, she says, we do our work and come home and love. So that's all they do. That's just the way it is. Page 140, we see kind of the first racism examples in the book, and probably one of the few in this book. This is the section, pages 140 through 142. You have Mrs. Turner, who is black, but she didn't like associating with black folks, as she says. Again, a stark contrast from Richard Wright's books. Those were full of racism, but these pages 140 to 142 are really the only lengthy passages in this book regarding race. I think the climax of the book comes in chapter 18 with the hurricane. As the hurricane rolls in, you have the title, quote, "Their eyes were watching God." They were standing there. They decided to ride out the storm. They were looking at the sky. Hurricanes show no mercy. They're kind of like tornadoes. They're not selective. They destroy everything. And ultimately, this hurricane even destroyed Janie and Tea Cake's love. When Tea Cake gets sick, Janie knows that she has to kill him in order to save herself. It was, she says on page 184, it was the meanest moment of eternity, the moment that she had to kill him. The grief of darkness descended. Luckily she was freed by the jury. And then the last chapter of the book goes back to the conversation with Phoebe. She says on page 191, "I done been to the horizon and back, and now I can sit here in my house and live by comparisons." And I wonder, is she going to sit there and compare her life in Eatonville with the life she had in the Everglades with Tea Cake? Is she going to compare Jody to Tea Cake? She says, "Love is like the sea. It's a moving thing, but still in all it takes. It's shaped from the shore it meets, and it's different with every shore." And then on 192, "It's a known fact, Phoebe. You got to go there to know there. Two things everybody's got to do for themselves. They got to go to God, and they got to find out about living for themselves." So a lot of wisdom from Janie in the end. So some questions I have for you. This is a little bit longer video. I didn't mean for it to be this long, but I had a lot I wanted to say. So some questions for you. Even though Janie ages from her late teens to her late 40s and early 50s by the end of the novel, do you see this as what we would call a coming-of-age story? If so, why or how do you see it that way? Second question, what do you see as Janie's quest? When I did my critical essay presentation, I talked about the quest some. So what do you see as her quest here? Does she achieve that quest? If so, how? And if not, why not? Is the quest physical, emotional, spiritual, or a combination of any of those? Third question, does the use of language work for you? There's the back and forth between the omniscient narrator, the dialogue with the local dialect and the colloquialisms. So does that work for you, and why or why not? Question 4, discuss what might be considered the central theme, the relationship between humans and the world around them, especially how that relates to Janie's marriages to both Jody and Tea Cake. Her marriages to them were completely different, in my opinion. And then the last question, I just kind of want you to discuss your favorite quote or your favorite character that was in the book, and why did that quote or that character appeal to you personally. Thanks for watching. Sorry it's a little bit longer. Hope you have a great week. Thanks, guys. Bye.